So we're going to go ahead and open our session today. Welcome all from all over the place, it looks like, to New Perspectives. And many of you have probably joined us on other Saturday mornings and know that New Perspectives is an integral yoga platform dedicated to the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And it is being sponsored by Aro University in Surat, India, and sister organizations, Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center in Surat and here in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. So I'm Rade, director of the Fountain Inn Center, and I'm joined by Dr. Vladimir Yatsenko, also with our center, and he will be our moderator for today's webinar. So if we can just open and begin with a few moments of silence, please. Thank you. So last week, Ulrich Morhoff, who is a physicist and philosopher of science, spoke on the intriguing topic, quantum mechanics and consciousness, referencing his scientific observations and findings to the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And in fact, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother firmly attest to the fact that spirit and matter are in their essence one and can, in manifestation, be united and will be united through the process of evolution aided by the supramental consciousness. So today we continue this engaging topic on science and spirituality with Lynda Lester, who will address the union of spirit and matter. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Vladimir Yatsenko, who will introduce our esteemed speaker for today and formally open the New Perspective Forum. Vladimir?
Thank you, Rade. Yes, we are very happy to have with us today Lynda Lester, who is a current director and former president of the Sri Aurobindo Association of America. She edited the Integral Yoga Journal Collaboration for 10 years and has given numerous presentations on yoga and consciousness around the US. She co-organized 2 Aum Integral Yoga conferences in Colorado, served on the board of Auroville International USA, and co-moderated the Integral Yoga Forum from 2000 till 2004. So the topic of today's presentation is fundamental for the Integral Yoga, that is the union of spirit and matter. It is the aim of Integral Yoga, which culminates in supramental manifestation, where heaven and earth become equal and one. Heaven Father and Earth Mother, they speaking in the language of the Veda, or Purusha and Prakriti of the Gita, or Ishvara and Shakti of the Tantra. Without him I exist not, says the Mother. Without me he is unmanifest. There are beautiful lines in Savitri from Secret Knowledge, which I would like to quote here before we start our session. This whole wide world is only he and she. This is the knot that ties together the stars. The two who are one are the secret of all power. The two who are one are the might and right in things. His soul, silent, supports the world and her. His acts are her commandments' registers. Happy, inert, he lies beneath her feet. His breast he offers for her cosmic dance, of which our lives are the quivering theatre, and none could bear but for his strength within. Yet none would leave because of his delight. So with these words, I invite Lynda to address the audience. Please, Lynda.
Oh my gosh. That was just so great, Vladimir. That was just like a real consciousness changer. Could listen to that forever. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And want to give a big thank you to you and Rade and the LaGrasse Sri Aurobindo Center for the opportunity to present today. Because, New Perspectives is such a terrific series, and there's been so many wonderful speakers and topics. So I really feel honored to participate. So, okay, let me do a little screen share here. All righty. And there we go. Yay. First, can you hear me okay? Mic is working? Yeah?
Yep, it's good.
Yes.
All right, so as Vladimir said, the name of this presentation is The Union of Spirit and Matter, Science, Consciousness, and a Life Divine. And I thought I would start out by noting that through the ages, spirit and matter have been seen as absolute opposites. Spirit, of course, as ethereal and ineffable and immaterial, and matter, on the other hand, as objective, solid, and obvious. And both have been thought to be the ultimate reality. Both have inspired humanity, and the chasm between them has been called unbridgeable. But Sri Aurobindo and Mira Alfassa, whom we know as the mother, thought otherwise. And for anyone who's new to integral yoga, they were, of course, two great spiritual leaders of the 20th century. And their ideal was to join the heights and the depths together to bring about a spiritual transformation here on Earth in the conditions of the material universe. And this, this would not be, like a change of life into something purely subtle, where once we're realized, we ascend into light bodies and leave the disappear from the physical plane. This would be rather an integral transformation that would not cast away the energies of matter and its capacities, but bring out its hidden possibilities and innate divinity, so that the spiritual summits and the material base of existence would be united in a life divine on Earth. And of course, when I was in the 8th grade, I'd never heard of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. That's a long, long time ago. But that's actually when I first noticed the equal and opposite pull of spirit and matter. So I was interested in religion, but it was clear to me that if I were to really take it seriously, I should devote myself completely to God and not go to what were then called boy-girl dances at school. And that's what we actually used to look like, which I saw them as frivolous and unspiritual and ungodly. Rather, I should give up the pomps and vanities of worldly life and become some kind of nun. Well, as you can imagine, I didn't renounce the world, and I did go to the dances, right? Okay. A few years later, though, nevertheless, later on, I did begin exploring spiritual consciousness. And I found that the more I did, the more I felt its bliss and radiance and beauty, its light, its power. And these are real experiences that you have, when you're in those spiritual states. The more I felt those states, the flatter and more pitiful and generally unacceptable the outer world seemed to be in comparison. Okay, but then again, on the other hand, after years of spiritual experience and integral yoga, and after decades trying with all my heart to open myself to transformation of the outer nature, here you see me obviously getting older, I began to notice that when I was in the outer physical consciousness, spiritual reality still seemed distant from the material world. And transformation seemed as far away as it did when I first began, and a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And that's when I began to understand why the saints and sages of old believed that matter is incorrigible, cannot be spiritualized. So the thing to do is just head for nirvana, escape matter, stop reincarnating, okay? And I didn't believe it. I don't believe it because I've had firsthand experience to the contrary. And I've read Mother's experiences with the yoga of matter. But faced with what sometimes seemed like the impossibility of transformation and the difficulty of uniting spirit and matter, I began to understand that side of the argument only too well. But now the plot thickens because meanwhile, I spent 16 years as a writer at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR as it's called, which is a national laboratory in Boulder, Colorado, where scientists study the Earth and the sun and the clouds and the oceans using very fast supercomputers. So my friends and colleagues, there they are, there's some of them. They had advanced degrees in math and physics, chemical engineering, computer science. And can you see me in there? You see me? Yeah, there I am. And they constantly laughed at me when I talked about, higher consciousness in quotes, which to them was some spaced out hippie dogma. And, that was pretty much to be expected because, first of all, as many of us have found in our explorations of consciousness, by default, humans always associate the real with the materially perceptible. Our physical senses can't perceive anything immaterial, although we have other senses that can. But second of all, at a place like NCAR, it's not the world within, but the world without that matters, okay? So NCAR is a science lab, and the purpose of science is to gain knowledge about the processes of nature. And in this case, atmospheric processes, as you can see. This is, a wonderful exhibit they have in the lobby there. So what's important here is to measure and analyze data, to develop testable hypotheses and make accurate predictions, to conduct experiments and share results with other scientists who replicate those results, or challenge them if they're wrong or incomplete. And of course, to use mathematical tools to quantify and solve problems. Actually, I took all these photos. This is the kind of stuff they talk about at lunch at NCAR. I kid you not. So, all right. We know that this objective, empirical, methodical approach to knowledge is called the scientific method. And it's fostered an age of rationality and brought tremendous technological progress to society and resulted in untold benefits to humanity. It's also resulted in a materialistic way of thinking that, due to its tremendous success in widening our understanding, has spread through much of the world and strongly shaped the modern mind. Okay, now it's important to remember that when this way of thinking first appeared in Europe in the 1600s, it was revolutionary. Religion was the sole arbiter of truth, and people were tried for heresy for saying that the earth moved around the sun. And I see someone raise their hand. I think probably what we'll do is we'll take the questions at the end, if that's all right. Okay.
Yeah, and Lynda, if I can just mention too, anybody that has a question, instead of raising your hand, there's a little Q&A box there at the bottom. So just type your question in there for Lynda's viewing later. Thank you.
So you say back in the 1600s, you say that the earth revolves around the sun. You get tried for heresy. Okay, so Sri Aurobindo said that Oh, I forgot where I was. Now I remember where I was. Sri Aurobindo says that the brief period of rationalistic materialism we've been going through has helped humanity a great deal. Okay, why? It swept away irrational dogmas, perverting superstitions, and misleading imaginations. Knowledge, he says, should be based on a clean, pure, and disciplined intellect. And as human consciousness evolves towards higher levels, he says, it's necessary sometimes to return to sensible fact, to the concrete realities of the physical world. And he says, it even may be that the supraphysical can only be really mastered in its fullness when we keep our feet firmly on the physical. The wider we extend and the surer we make our knowledge of the physical world, the wider and surer becomes the foundation for even the highest spiritual knowledge. Okay? But it's interesting. I find it interesting that he calls this a brief period of rationalistic materialism. So if that's true, and if the materialistic paradigm is not the sole truth of things, certain anomalies and contradictions may start showing up to suggest that this view, while valid for certain purposes, may not be the complete picture. And this indeed has been the case starting around the end of the 19th century. So at that time, scientists had a picture of the universe they thought was nearly complete, and it was based on the laws of motion, electromagnetism, and thermodynamics. And in this view, all things are made of matter. All things that happen are the result of physical interactions. Reality is objective, and it's out there. And mind and consciousness are irrelevant. Okay, then in 1905, you know what happened. Einstein revolutionized the understanding of matter, energy, space, and time with his theory of special relativity. And he showed that mass, the very substance of an object, is equivalent to energy, and that space and time are elastic depending on your point of view. So this was the first scientific indication that physical reality depends in some way on the observer. And meanwhile, Max Planck discovered that light seems to be radiated and absorbed in spurts that release packets of energy called quanta. And he found this quite perplexing because, scientists could demonstrate the opposite, that light was a spread out wave. But Einstein liked Planck's idea, and 5 years later, he proposed that light itself is a stream of discrete particles. And this laid the groundwork for a brand new kind of physics, quantum theory. Okay? And then by the 1920s, physicists realized that photons and protons and electrons and atoms and molecules and all the tiniest components of matter behave sometimes like particles, but sometimes like waves of energy, which seemed impossible. How could a proton be both a tiny particle and a spread out electromagnetic wave? But experiments proved it. And as scientists developed the math to deal with it, they saw that the solution to this strange problem of wave-particle duality had created a newer and deeper mystery, the measurement problem. Okay, so what's that about? A quantum particle is mathematically described in terms of a probability wave or wave function, That's my artist's conception of a wave function. And meaning that a particle seems to be in a sort of superposition of all possible states. And it doesn't have a definite location or momentum or even a discrete existence until it's measured, at which point the wave function collapses and the particle takes on discrete objective properties. All right? So nobody's ever been able to figure out how this transition from probability to concrete reality takes place exactly, but in some way, the observer, the person who designs and conducts the experiment, who takes the measurement, seems to play a key role in bringing fuzzy quantum particles into structured form. And this would seem to suggest that mind or consciousness plays some role in materializing reality. Okay, so this is such a flabbergasting idea that it's been widely rejected by physicists who want nothing to do with consciousness and who still today are trying to find alternative explanations for the collapse of the wave function. Many of them decide that the best course is to not spend a lot of time thinking about it. Their job is physics, not metaphysics. So they simply use the equations. You can see the equations here, right there. Those are the exact ones. You can see it, especially the popsicles. That's part of it. Anyway, they use the equations which work, and they just concentrate on the pragmatic results. And this approach is described as shut up and calculate. So, okay. But meanwhile, there's yet another revelation that comes from quantum theory. And this one is the most mind-boggling of all. So Newtonian physics, it sees the world as consisting of independent, separate objects that interact with each other locally, like right there, like a cue in a billiard ball, through physical influences that cannot exceed the speed of light. But early in the development of quantum theory, scientists became aware of something called quantum entanglement. Oh boy. So that happens when two particles are associated or entangled with each other so that measuring one instantly determines the state of the other. So Einstein realized, he was very smart, he realized that if two particles were far enough apart, they'd have to communicate faster than the speed of light. And he called this spooky action at a distance, hated it, and thought that because it was predicted by quantum theory, there was something wrong with quantum theory. But in fact, there wasn't. And in 1964, it was proven that no matter how far apart two entangled particles are, even halfway across the universe, they do influence each other instantly in no time at all, outside of time. And this non-local influencing does not diminish with distance, and it links one location to another without crossing space, without decay, without delay, faster than the speed of light. And this has been called the most profound discovery of science because it shows that the old view of a mechanical clockwork universe where all objects are separate and interact only at the local level and only through material processes that obey the laws of classical physics is not completely true, okay? Rather, this discovery shows that underlying the local reality of objective, separate objects and phenomena, there's some kind of non-local reality in which nothing is separate and everything is connected. So, quantum physics has taken us from a simple and solely materialistic view of the world in which matter is solid, forces are physical, objects are separate, and reality is objective. And what you perceive with the outer senses is what's real. To a view that's considerably more subtle and nuanced and complex and multi-layered, in which matter is energy, time and space are relative, particles are waves, objects don't exist until they're observed, and entangled bits of matter communicate faster than light, and in which consciousness may have a part. Of course, the materialist paradigm still dominates, but we've seen in the past that as science moves forward, limiting or incomplete ideas change or are left behind. Okay, so example A, case in point, Ptolemy's geocentric model of the universe, which says that the sun and the moon and the planets and the stars revolve around the earth, was gradually superseded by the heliocentric model of Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler, in which the earth and the planets move around the sun. There's the sun. You see the sun in there? Woohoo, there it is. So the materialistic outlook too may be due for an upgrade, because science, in its search to find the reality of matter, has brought us to the door of the immaterial, which opens on enormous vistas of the future. Because Sri Aurobindo says that since the soul of science is its search for knowledge, as it reaches the borders of the superphysical, its very rush will carry it onward, and the success it's had with the visible world is just a hint of what it could bring to the exploration of what lies beyond. Meanwhile, he says, that's Sri Aurobindo. Meanwhile, three things will remain from the centuries of scientific materialism: the truth of the physical world, the scientific method of knowledge, and the importance of earth life and the human endeavor. These will stay, he says, but they'll be transformed in the light of a vaster and more intimate knowledge of self and world. So here's a halfway point. We're about halfway done. Take a sip of water. And I think it's time for a quick recap. Okay, what we just saw, shockingly enough, we just saw that according to quantum theory, the discrete existence of tiny subatomic particles apparently depends on observation, on there being a conscious observer, which seems to imply that consciousness plays some part in creating material reality. So this doesn't make any sense at all if you think that consciousness is just an incidental byproduct of matter. Because if the atoms in your brain produce your consciousness, you see the atoms there? Those are the atoms in your brain. If the atoms in your brain produce your consciousness, but your consciousness somehow brings those very atoms into existence, that's a paradox. But it's a paradox that doesn't exist for Sri Aurobindo. He draws from the wisdom of the East and of yoga, which is its own kind of science. And he says that behind and beyond the appearances of the universe, and involved in every particle of the universe, there's an omnipresent reality, which is at once an unknowable, indefinable, featureless absolute, and the source of all things and determinations. And this omnipresent reality puts forth the structures and the processes of the universe by the power, you could say, by the power of its consciousness, which is the fundamental thing in existence. And that consciousness extends from the supreme spiritual heights down through, I needed my pen here to keep me on track, down through the material world in a continuous spectrum. But it has different grades or levels. That's your spectrum. Sri Aurobindo calls these levels planes of consciousness, and they're the infrastructure on which the universe is built. And Sri Aurobindo says it's the gradual precipitation of consciousness through its various planes that manifests the universe. So it starts on the very summits with what they call in India Satchidananda, a transcendent and unmanifest plane of infinite existence, infinite conscious force, and infinite delight. And emerging out of that is what Sri Aurobindo calls the supermind or supramental, which is a vast unity consciousness that embraces both oneness and infinite diversity, an illimitable creative power that begins to physically manifest the universe. And out of supermind comes the plane of universal mind. So mind is the power of consciousness to divide things into parts, to measure and limit, okay? So the job of mind, the role of mind, is to translate infinity into the terms of the finite. And then comes universal life, a power of vitality and energy. And finally, matter, which is the ultimate division of consciousness into apparently self-isolated tiny bits. Okay, so let's go through that again. Let's go through that one more time. According to Sri Aurobindo, it's consciousness precipitating downward through its various planes that manifest the universe. And if we accept this point of view, we see that because matter derives from life and life derives from mind, ultimately, mind is the cause of atomic existence. Not your mind or my mind or any individual human mind, but universal mind, which is, it's an entire plane of consciousness, a neighborhood of reality, a cosmic condition. Okay, but wait a minute, stop a minute. According to this view, mind is the cause of cosmic existence. So does that sound familiar? Does that ring a bell? Quantum physics also indicates that somehow and most inexplicably, mind brings quantum particles into existence. Very interesting. Okay, so we're going to get back to that a little later. But okay, first off, this precipitation of consciousness downward through its various planes is called involution. And it's a process by which consciousness gradually limits itself by focusing on one particular aspect of reality to the exclusion of others. And, this is actually a power that consciousness has. It's called the power of exclusive concentration. And we see the same thing, when we get really absorbed in reading a book and we lose track of everything around us. Okay, so with involution, consciousness becomes more and more involved with what it's doing. So eventually it becomes so involved that it forgets itself in the oblivion of matter. And of course, the awareness of omnipresent reality remains underneath since it constitutes everything in the universe. But on the surface, this oblivion is complete. So you might ask, why would consciousness want to make itself oblivious? What was it thinking? Yeah, that's a good question. So many spiritualities, they say that it was thinking delusionally, that, the physical world is a deception of Maya, or at the very least, a catastrophic fall from grace. But Sri Aurobindo says, no, nuh-uh. Without this exclusive concentration of consciousness, manifestation would be limited to the higher worlds, or to a cosmos that's static and unchangeable. Involution was necessary. It was the necessary basis for individuation, to protect the individual from the largeness of infinity, so that behind that defense, an individuality could be worked out in time and space, in order that consciousness, which in its highest nature is one with infinite existence and infinite delight, could realize that delight not just in the undifferentiated supercosmic realms, but cosmically and individually, in an infinite multiplicity, in an endless infinitude of qualities and relationships, so that it could experience delight to the smallest and most precise degree. Fine-grained delight, objectified and intimate and endlessly varied and particular. A dynamic delight of becoming that cannot be experienced in the transcendent beyond. There is a purpose to the universe, Sri Aurobindo says, and that purpose is to materialize delight. Okay, what do you say about that? You might say, well, it may not look like that to ordinary beings in the physical world. And there's a reason for that. First, because due to that exclusive concentration of consciousness we talked about a minute ago, in our surface awareness, we're unaware that in the true nature, we are the infinite consciousness. And of course, the remedy for that is to become aware of who we really are, which is the reason we do yoga, right? But second of all, this materialization of delight is a long cosmic unfolding, and it's not yet complete. You look around at the world today, that's obvious. But on the other hand, this very unfolding is its own kind of delight. Because Sri Aurobindo says there's a joy that's impossible in the higher planes, the joy of discovery, which is one of the greatest joys of conscious being. Like, why do we watch a TV series like WandaVision? Okay, maybe I should say, why do I watch a TV series like WandaVision? Well, first of all, I love superhero movies, but this one presents us with a mystery, a great mystery. Why is a Marvel superhero with what is a Marvel superhero with superpowers doing in a campy, hilarious 1950s sitcom? Strange and unexpected things, developments, weird stuff is happening every week. We want to know why. We want to be there every step of the way for the progressive discovery of truth. We like finding out the secret. We like the big reveal at the end. It's so much fun. So on a much larger scale, Sri Aurobindo says that evolution itself is a discovery taking place in geologic time and on a cosmic scale. It's a progressive revelation of the consciousness that involved itself in matter and which is now awakening step by step, tiny discovery by tiny discovery, to the miracle of its infinite being. The big reveal, we could call it. That's a big reveal. And meanwhile, there's another thing. Meanwhile, we and all the many who come into this world, we are in essence one with that underlying consciousness. And for that reason, we're willing participants in that joy of self-discovery. We came here on purpose. We're drawn into the world for the very sake of the soul's adventure. What Sri Aurobindo calls the adventure of consciousness and joy. Okay, just to clarify, evolution is not the opposite of involution. If it were, as we evolved, we would drop our bodies, drop our life energy, drop our mentality, and eventually return to the featureless absolute. I took a picture of the featureless absolute. That's what it looks like. Evolution is something else. The gradual development of material forms that increasingly express higher and more subtle and more powerful modes of consciousness. So, life is the first step of that evolution. Mind is the second step. And here's where it gets really good. Nature is about to take a third great evolutionary step to supermind, developing out of humanity a supra-humanity, or even a new species whose native mode of consciousness will be supramental. And remember, we saw this supramental consciousness before, during the involution. Remember that? When the supermind, it put forth from itself the entire universe. So now we're seeing it from the other side of evolution. And this is totally mind-boggling because it means that those who make the evolutionary transition will possess that supramental consciousness while materially embodied, okay? And possess at the same time the highest ranges of supermind, the infinite existence, force, and delight of Satchidananda. Okay, so we've been hearing the word singularity for some time now, usually in the context of a technological singularity or AI superintelligence that evolves to a point where growth becomes exponential and causes unforeseeable changes to human civilization. I'll drink to that. But this is like a singularity beyond singularities. This is going to be a change beyond imagining. Because when someday we pass the barrier, we pass through that barrier that separates mind from supermind, we'll retain physical bodies, but will no longer be constrained by the divided, fragmented world of mental perception. We'll regain identity with the omnipresent reality, with the divine. Okay? Now, physicists are searching for a unified field theory, but this is really going to be the unified field because supermind is a unity consciousness that embraces all opposites, infinite and finite, oneness and diversity. It's an oceanic global consciousness of irresistible harmony and a compelling force of truth and beauty. And this, my friends, is what will bring a life divine in the material world and the union of spirit and matter, because previous spiritual realizations did not reach the level of supermind and did not have the power to transform universal nature. But supermind is the ultimate creative force, and it does have that power. So, of course, as with any great world-changing movement, there are always early adopters. And Sri Aurobindo and Mother were early adopters of the supermind. And they developed an integral yoga as a means by which our human nature can be transformed into supramental nature. They gave us the directions, they gave us roadmaps on how to do it. And they left us books, so many books, which are wonderful, including Mother's Agenda, 13 volumes of firsthand reports from the mother describing what it's like to perceive with the supramental sense and bring the supermind into the very cells of the body. And weirdly enough, these reports sound sometimes like descriptions of quantum particles before the collapse of the wave function, particles that exist in all positions simultaneously and behave like waves until they're measured. Mother says, for instance, that a supramentalized cell is no longer individual in the separate sense. Its boundaries seem to be gone, as if it's omnipresent. And her physical body, too, feels no limits, as if it's spread out everywhere. And she speaks of a material consciousness that feels like the movement of corporeal waves. So, remember how Sri Aurobindo says that mind, which is the consciousness of division and separation, is the cause of atomic existence. And how quantum physics seems to indicate that observation, and that's mental observation, collapses the wave function. So I just wonder if supermind, the supramental consciousness, which differentiates without dividing and expresses multiple points within an indissoluble oneness, perceives matter in more of a wave-like form, or perhaps supramentalized matter behaves differently than mentalized matter. Okay? Food for thought. In fact, Mother says that as matter wakens to the supermind, as matter is permeated by the supermind, it develops new qualities of fluidity, subtlety, penetrability, suppleness, much less rigidity of form. And that's not so hard to remember, to imagine, when you remember that matter by itself is inert and unmoving, but matter infused by life can breathe and run and experience. And matter infused by life and mind starts to attain all kinds of masteries. And you know who that is? That's Simone Biles, in the Olympics. She's just amazing. So matter infused by life, mind, and supermind will bring untold new possibilities to the physical body, as we'll see in just another minute. But another thing, here's another thing. Mother also talks about she talks about perceiving a kind of material mesh enveloping the earth. She's experienced this, that connects all events and it links them and makes them interdependent. And she says, if you've got a power over part of this mesh, you can change a whole range of circumstances, which in appearance are unrelated. So Einstein might call this spooky action at a distance, but it sounds like non-locality and quantum entanglement to me. So I'm making these connections between science and yoga because I think there are some interesting connections to make. And Mother once said, in fact, that although the practice of science and yoga are different, what's discovered will be the same because there aren't two things to be found, but one, the omnipresent reality. And I also want to bring up here, again, Sri Aurobindo's remark that the more knowledge we have of the physical world, the better is our foundation for the highest spiritual knowledge. Mother said that as she pursued the minute work of supramentalizing her body, she had the feeling that from the purely material standpoint, chemically, biologically, medically, therapeutically, she knew nothing. And she said, for a long time, I've been in search of a doctor, a man with full medical knowledge, knowing all that they know now about the human body and the way to cure it, and capable of having the contact with the higher consciousness. Because through such an instrument, one could do very interesting things. I would very much like to discuss certain details of the body's functioning and organization with a man who thoroughly knows anatomy, biology, physical, and bodily chemistry, and who's ready to understand that all those things are a projection of other forces, subtler forces, who's able to feel things as I feel them in my own body, to know all the material, cellular questions with the full knowledge of all the details, and at the same time to have that vision of the true thing. If you could put both together, that would be marvelous. A synthesis of knowledge, not a scientific knowledge or a spiritual one, rather something that can unite them both and transcend them into a third position, a vision where the orthodox scientific view can be very useful once one knows the deeper truth it represents. Okay, so she's talking about the synthesis of spiritual and material knowledge into a new kind of integral knowledge. But this was way back, 61, 64, long before the popularization of integrative medicine, physical culture, consciousness studies, and yoga, Eastern spirituality, and long before the internet and Google and Zoom. So maybe now, in the age of instant global information access, as more people take up this work, it will be possible to integrate scientific and yogic knowledge to a greater degree than ever before. And meanwhile, of course, it's a long way from mind to supermind, and there are many difficult passages and intervening states and challenges to overcome. But in the end, we as evolutionary travelers will see that the soul's long journey has been worth it. Mother says that the physical realization of divinity will bring a tremendous concentration of energy, a power and reality that exists in none of the other states of consciousness. It will be something solid, unalterable, complete, with a precision and exactness down to the atom. And Sri Aurobindo says the supermind will give to the body a fullness of capacity far beyond anything now possible, putting an end to suffering, illness, aging, even death, extending the powers of perception and will, giving mastery of space and time. In the supramental consciousness, Sri Aurobindo says, we will feel the divine light and power and bliss above us and descending into us, and feeling every strand of our nature, every cell and atom of our being, flooding our soul and mind and life and body, surrounding us like an illimitable sea, and filling the world, suffusing all our feeling and sense and experience, and making all our life truly and utterly divine. So to close here, talking about the union of spirit and matter, I'd like to read a quote from the mother. She says, I saw that secret. I saw that it is in earthly nature, earthly matter. I saw that secret. I saw that it is in earthly matter on earth that the Supreme becomes perfect. Anything we can humanly feel or see is nothing compared to that. I've never seen anything or felt anything so beautiful. I've had moments, I've had hours, the most wonderful hours ever possible on earth. And I think that's a future we can be working toward and aspiring for. So So that's it. And thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynda, for this wonderful presentation, which is kind of keeping us wondering about the world and ourselves and manifestation and the future of this manifestation. You put together the whole vision in such a beautiful way that really appeals to people. We already get so many feedbacks about your wonderful presentation, and people want to have it already recorded. They are asking for these recordings.
It's wonderful.
Right. There are a few questions here. One was put into the chat, and I will read from there. And that is, it was removed already.
I think maybe this is it.
Here it is.
You found
yes.
it? Okay.
So can we say that mind divides and supermind unites?
Yeah.
Right. There is another question. How?
Yeah. The mind, it's binary. It thinks in terms of this or that. You can do this. There's a song. There's a popular song that goes, you can go with this. You can go with that. That's the mind. And it can amalgamate things in a bunch. It can put them all together, but it cannot unify them. It just sees things in little pieces and little bits. And that's its job. But the supermind, it sees all the pieces because it includes them all, but at the same time, it never loses the oneness underneath all the pieces. So that's right. The mind divides and the supermind unites.
Beautiful. There is another question. How is the visible universe connected to the spirit world? I thought we were trying to say the whole presentation was about that, but
yeah.
Please, if you have some thoughts, could you share?
Read that again.
How is the visible universe connected to the spirit world?
Okay, so let's say you live in a city, okay? You got a bunch of different neighborhoods. You got a neighborhood over here that's, the rich neighborhood. It's gated. It's really nice. It's beautiful. You got fountains. And then you got kind of a middle class neighborhood over here. And then you got kind of not a very good neighborhood over there. And you got a really awful neighborhood over there. But it's all one city. And what you perceive depends on the neighborhood that you're in. Okay, so how it's connected, it's all in the one city. It's the one omnipresent reality, but the visible world is one neighborhood. That's like the world of matter and life and mind. That's, the matter, life, and mind neighborhood. And over there is the supramental and Satchitananda neighborhood. But if you look underneath, they're all connected because they're all made out of one thing. But the difference, there really isn't a difference. The difference is in the status of consciousness that you're in. So change the state of consciousness, and then you'll see the connection.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, everybody wants to have your presentation, want it to be published in collaboration. So we will do something definitely in that regard. Yes, that's basically it for today. And we are right on time.
Oh, fantastic.
I just have to say, Lynda, for my part, that was such an amazing and streamlined discussion and presentation. I've never seen something as beautiful as you've put together in the slide, as well as elaborately discussed and presented. It was just marvelous and just so much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynda.
Thank you. Lynda. Namaste, everybody. Namaste. And to all you people out there in Zoom land, hi.
Yeah,
By and by.
Lynda, there were questions if you would be willing to share your presentation. I've been putting in the chat box all of this. The recording itself will be available on our website, thelagrange.center.com. But I don't know how you feel of us also sending out to those that were here today your actual PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, yeah, you can certainly do that. But I should say that I stole all those images. So, this is not to be published in any commercial way or,
Sure.
in print or anything. It's just fun images, from the internet. So with that understanding, sure. And, you'll have to use file transfer, but sure, that'd be fine. Yeah.
Perfect. So all those that have attended today or registered, we'll send out both the link to the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
everybody. Take care.
Namaste.
Love to be here. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.